طيب. So yeah, today we're going to be covering the tractology. Mostly هنعمل ascending tracts, the descending tracts, and we're gonna try to focus on the tests حقت كل tract والclinical correlations في النهاية. When it comes to tractology, يعني ما في specific topic that's more important than the other. يعني it's all important, so we're going to be covering everything in not in too much detail, but in enough detail that you guys would be able to understand it and be able to solve questions. For neuro, most of the questions are usually, and they're straightforward. They don't go too complicated or too confusing, but they do sometimes have clinical questions. يعني it would be very common for tractology in تلاقوا questions where they would tell you if something is damaged and what are the symptoms, or the other way around, if something is في symptom معينة وبيسألوكم like which tract is damaged. Yeah, it's very common. So keep يعني لما نصل للنهاية للclinical correlations focus on that برضو. تمام؟ طيب, so هنبدأ بالascending. And again, if anyone has any questions at any point, just let me know and stop me to repeat أي حاجة ما وضعت لكم. تمام? So ascending tracts are all sensory. دي أول حاجة. Ascending are sensory, and basically they go from the receptor to the brain. تمام? So they أول حاجة sensory is ascending. يعني they're going from receptors upwards towards the brain. Right? يلا, when it comes to sensory or ascending tracts, they don't go all in one go. So they're going to be synapsing on the way. تمام? So each time they synapse, we call it an order neuron. تمام? فعندنا first order neuron, second order neuron, third order neuron. تمام؟ يلا, a third order neuron is always between the thalamus and the brain. تمام؟ يعني ال tracts ديل في النهاية هم بيخشوا الثالاموس, بيصلوا الثالاموس. And then from the thalamus to the brain is the third order neuron. However, the first and second order neurons there, they depend on the tract. يعني كل tract, each tract has its own location for a first order neuron and a second order neuron, and you have to know this. تمام؟ يعني tracts there, they're going to be going from the receptor to the brain by synapsing a few times. تمام؟ Each time they synapse, we call it an order neuron. So the first time they synapse, we'll call it a first order neuron. The second time they synapse, we'll call it a second order neuron. The third time, we'll call it third order neuron. يلا, into what you're supposed to know is إنكم تحفظوا each tract. The first order neuron حقته وين, the second order neuron حقته وين. تمام؟ A third order neuron دائما الإجابة حقتها is it's in the thalamus. تمام? So never bother thinking about it. If you hear third order neuron for any tract, it's thalamus. لكن the first or second order neuron, you're gonna find them different in different tracts. And if you كل tract going onwards, you'll hear me saying the first order neuron is in the following place, the second order neuron is in the following place. But right now, I'm just explaining the main concept of what an order neuron is. عشان when I do say it, it makes sense to you guys. تمام? Did it make sense? The order neurons are just as synapses that happen, or the links that happen along the way of the pathway. تمام? Okay, تمام. يلا, then afterwards we're going to divide our ascending tracts into two, into conscious sensation and unconscious sensation. So يعني هنقسمها ل tracts that carry sensations that you can actually feel. يعني you're aware of them. So زي pain, for example. If you feel pain, you know you're feeling pain. And في unconscious sensations هنتكلم عنها بعد شوية برضو, where you're not aware of them but your brain just knows them. تمام؟ ففي conscious sensation or unconscious sensation. Exam wise, it's more important to focus on unconscious. يعني ده أهم. It's way more marks than an unconscious, right? unconscious ده you could skip it if you don't want to يعني focus much on it. طيب فهنقوم نركز على conscious sensations. زي ما قلنا conscious sensations are sensations you're able to tell or you're able to feel. طيب فيلا في ديل عندنا فيه الdorsal column tract وعندنا فيه الspinothalamic tract. تمام؟ يعني conscious sensation فيه اثنين، فيه dorsal column وفيه spinothalamic. تمام؟ الdorsal column والspinothalamic الاثنين ascending tract conscious. يعني you're able to understand the feeling that you're feeling ده. And these two are probably your most important tracts في tractology كله. يعني if you understood these two you're practically good to go. تمام؟ يعني if you get these two ما في حاجة تغلبك ثاني في tractology. تمام؟ So قلنا عندنا conscious sensation dorsal column وspinothalamic. نبدأ بالdorsal column. يلا الdorsal column tract ده it carries the following sensations. It carries fine touch, pressure, vibration, position, and 2-point discrimination. يلا I'll explain each of them. Fine touch, so it's when someone is touching you لكن with something that's very light. زي مثلا التouch بالcottons. يعني cotton touch is a fine touch. تمام؟ يعني لو زول touched you with a cotton piece or a tissue or something, that's fine touch. في تاني pressure, which is maintained touch at a specific level. يعني if you're pressing on someone or if you're holding something, that's pressure. Vibration, so when something is vibrating on you, if you can feel the vibration, it's dorsal column tract. Position, which is basically your ability to tell which position you're in. يعني proprioception, basically. And then 2-point discrimination, which is basically that you're able to literally tell the difference between 2 points next to each other. تمام؟ في أي زول that needs explanation لأي واحدة من ده؟ طيب, so they basically the main information that you're carried by. So عندنا fine touch, which is basically touching by a piece of cotton, for example. في pressure, which is defined as maintained touch, يعني when something is pressing on you. Vibration, so something is vibrating on you. Position, so you're able to tell if your hand is up or down, if you're standing or sitting, and so on. في 2-point discrimination, which basically you're able to tell the difference between 2 points next to each other. And for example, if someone touches you and like touches you, you're able to feel every part of them touching you. And if let's say I poke you with both my fingers, okay? Like these are 2 fingers, I poke you with both fingers, you're able to feel both fingers separately, صح? Like you're able to tell this person is touching you with 2 fingers, right? That's basically the idea of the sensation. يلا هما they usually for exam purposes they only bring up the first 2 or the first 3, so they basically usually mention fine touch, pressure, vibration. هما أهم 3 to memorize. تمام؟ طيب يلا the type of fibers دي ما تشتغلوا بقى until you guys do CNS physiology. It's not important. Forget about it. نيجي للorder of neurons. تمام؟ يلا order of neurons عندنا 3. عندنا first order which happens في حتة بنسميها dorsal root ganglia. تمام؟ I'm going to be showing you in a picture in a bit. لكن first order of the dorsal column tract is in the dorsal root ganglia. A second order is in the brachial and cunate nuclei in the medulla. تمام? So it's in the brainstem, in the medulla. And the third order is the ventroposterior nucleus of the thalamus. تمام? So ventroposterior nuclei of the thalamus. So there are 3 order neurons in there. In the first order في dorsal root ganglia, a second order في brachial and cunate in the medulla, with third order في ventroposterior nuclei of the thalamus. Eventually it reaches the brain, where in the brain في primary sensory area, which is known as the post-central gyrus. This piece of information not as important, لكن اللي قدام بتبقى more important. تمام? Like when you guys start doing, like if you're doing brain وكده, it's important. لكن right now you're doing tractology, so بس أعرفوا الثلاثة, the main 3 orders. So finally في النهاية it reaches the post-central gyrus, which is the primary sensory area. Not that important. What's really important is in the first order في dorsal root ganglia, a second order في البلاسيل والcunate in the medulla, والthird order في ventroposterior nuclei of the thalamus. تمام. يلا I'll show you just a small drawing here. I'll like make an illustration to make more sense. طيب يعني هنبدأ أول حاجة هنا. تمام. Let's say someone touched you with a cotton here. It'll go أول حاجة first order neuron من الريسبتور لحد الحتة دي which is the dorsal root ganglia. تمام. هنا دي كده first order neuron. بعد ذاك second order neuron هتشيل من الdorsal root ganglia وتطلع on the same side of the brain up until we reach the medulla. تمام. Now when you reach the medulla it's going to make its second order neuron. تمام. which basically crosses to the other side. تمام. This is something important. إنه في الميدولا it crosses to the other side and then continues to the thalamus and to the brain. تمام. يعني the first order neuron في الdorsal root في spinal cord. تمام. a second order neuron في الميدولا and it crosses to the other side. Or in other words it decussates. تمام. بعد ذاك الثird order في الثالاموس. So let me repeat again. إنه it basically بتمشي أول واحد first order neuron في dorsal root, not that important. So dorsal root here, dorsal root, and it makes a second order neuron. It goes up all the way to the medulla, and then in the medulla it crosses to the other side when it makes the second order neuron. يعني دايما second order neuron دي it's crossing to the other side. تمام. After it crosses to the other side it goes up to the thalamus and then up to the brain. يعني the brain that receives your sensation on the left is actually taking sensation from the right, and the brain receiving the sensation on the right is actually taking it from the left لأنه بيحصل لنا crossing في level of the medulla. Make sense? طيب we'll continue and then نقدر يعني to repeat it again after we're doing with spinothalamic. We'll repeat the whole thing again so that no one's confused. طيب so the spinothalamic tract ده الثاني هو بيشيل pain and temperature and touch. طيب لكن a spinothalamic itself we divide it into more. We divide it into lateral spinothalamic or anterior spinothalamic. Okay, the lateral spinothalamic is for pain and temperature while the anterior spinothalamic is for touch. Okay, so a spinothalamic itself we divide it into lateral and anterior. The lateral is for pain and temperature while the anterior is for touch. But for simplicity I'm just mixing them together because I mean you could memorize this fact or you could just go with just spinothalamic. It's fine يعني. So spinothalamic in general takes pain, touch and temperature, but pain and temperature are by the lateral while touch is by the anterior. Its first order neuron is the dorsal root ganglia, again same as the posterior or dorsal column. لكن a second order is في substantia gelatinosa. So this nuclei اسمها substantia gelatinosa, and substantia gelatinosa is found in the spinal cord. Okay, and then the third layer or third order is by the ventroposterior nuclei of the thalamus. So the same as the other one, thalamus, but the thing that's different here is the second order neuron. So the second order neuron in the case of a spinothalamic tract is in the substantia gelatinosa of the spinal cord, unlike the dorsal column tract كانت وين؟ كانت في nucleus cunate and gracili of the medulla. تمام? Up to this point clear? Now let's try and draw it again as well to see what it looks like. So we're going to start from this side, and someone, for example, you're touching you touch something cold, for example, on this side. So temperature is going to be taken by spinothalamic, right? So the spinothalamic tract is going to take it first order neuron to the dorsal root ganglia, so the first order. and then second order neuron from the dorsal root ganglia to the nucleus, substantia gelatinosa, okay? And then from substantia gelatinosa, it's gonna have its second order neuron gonna happen, and it's gonna cross to the other side and go upwards all the way to the thalamus and then to the brain. So the third order neuron. تمام؟ يعني in this case, the first order was in the dorsal root again, but the second order was in substantia gelatinosa, and then it crossed over, and then it went to the thalamus for the third, and the brain, and then brain. يعني order of the spinothalamic is this way. But the order of the dorsal column was that the first root was in the dorsal root ganglia, the second was in the medulla, and it crossed, and then the third was in the thalamus, and the fourth was, and then after that it went to the brain, right? So a difference بيناتهم حيكون وين؟ A difference بيناتهم is in the second order neuron. تمام؟ So in that case, you guys would understand that when we're touching the spinal cord, يعني if we were to injure the spinal cord at the level of the spinal cord, تمام؟ يعني before the medulla, we would be injuring a spinothalamic that's on the opposite side, right? Because it already crossed. Like we would not be injuring a dorsal column that crossed because it didn't cross yet. Make sense? I'll repeat it again. يعني مثلا, let's say we have these two sensations, right? The spinothalamic, مشى, it crossed to the other side and then it went up. لكن ده dorsal root. So it went in and it went on its, the dorsal root, it went in and it went on its same side and it crossed in the medulla. So if you were to injure someone in this level, you'd be injuring the opposite side, the crossed spinothalamic. Like you would be injuring the uncrossed dorsal root column. You guys get this so far? And always, if you're asked a question and you're asked to tell which side it is, imagine the tract going upwards and think, did it cross yet or did it not cross yet? And if it crossed, you're gonna tell the opposite side. Like if it didn't cross, you're gonna say the same side. طيب أنا هعيد الكلام again. يعني إحنا عندنا مشكلتنا مش هنا. مشكلتنا إنه الspinothalamic will cross immediately في نفس الليفل حقته. يعني it will cross in the spinal cord ذاته. لكن الدورسال column حقنا does not cross في الليفل حقته. بيطلع فوق up until it reaches the medulla and then it crosses. So let's say إحنا we're feeling temperature at the level of T10. تمام؟ let's say الزول ده اتضرب في level of T10. تمام؟ الspinothalamic tract حقه it gets damaged is of the opposite side. Why is it of the opposite side? لأنه الspinothalamic tract قبل it crossed before it reached that level. Make sense? لكن الdorsal column حقه is on the same side لأنه it didn't cross yet. Did you get that? ولا لسه confusing? So for now, just focus on the concept of which one crosses, which one doesn't cross. I'll explain the clinical points تاني of the whole injuring thing again in the end. بس خلينا نركز على which ones cross, which ones don't, which ones cross at which level. يعني spinothalamic will cross at the substantia gelatinosa في spinal cord, لكن dorsal column will cross في gracili والcunate, which are in the medulla. تمام؟ ده كده conscious sensation, which are the two spinothalamic and dorsal column tracts. في تاني unconscious sensations. Unconscious sensations there are a lot of tracts. لكن you guys are not you're not supposed to memorize that much about them. تمام؟ يعني don't bother too much with them. طيب؟ في posterior spinocerebellar والanterior spinocerebellar tracts. تمام؟ they carry proprioception. تمام؟ they carry proprioception للcerebellum to help you with your balance, but you're not aware of it. يعني the fact that you're standing up and you're able to stand is because التراكتين ديل, they're carrying sensation of your position to your cerebellum and they're telling you how to stand, but you're not aware of it. You're not literally telling yourself to stay standing the entire time, right? You're just standing. عشان كده it's unconscious, so it's not something you can control. It's just your body tells your cerebellum and your cerebellum acts. يلا, you're gonna notice حاجة إنه none of them will go to the thalamus. لأنه أي حاجة بتمشي thalamus and brain is something that you can feel. لكن أي حاجة بتمشي brain stem or cerebellum is something that's subconscious or unconscious. يعني all of these tracts are not gonna go to the brain or to the thalamus. They're gonna go somewhere else. But الاثنين منهم مش cerebellum. So you're not gonna feel it because you can't control your cerebellum. You're like, you don't understand the signals اللي بتمشي cerebellum. تمام؟ يلا في تاني اثنين, في spinal olivary tract. ثلاثة sorry. في spinal olivary tract, which basically carries sensation from to the olivary nucleus. olivary nucleus دي قاعدة وين؟ it's also in your brainstem. تمام؟ في الbrainstem. And it basically just helps with coordination and balance برضو. في تاني spinotectal tract. والspinotectal ده بيودي للميد brain برضو, في الميد brain. And it also carries a position, لكن it's responsible for this thing called turning. It's responsible for turning of head and eye towards towards stimulus. يعني for example, if I touch you on your arm, you automatically look to your to the person, صح؟ يعني لو زول هبشك طوال بتعين له automatically, right? It's a reflex. يلا reflex ده it's responsible for it spinotectal tract ده. يعني it controls touch مع coordination of your head and neck. So you automatically look at the person. But that's all it does. يعني it doesn't do anything more. You're not really understanding the process ده. You just do it, صح? So it's unconscious. يعني spinotectal tract simply just controls your head to move when someone touches you. That's all. في تاني spinal reticular. It's basically a reticular formation. الفانكشن حقتها is related to sleep و consciousness. So a spinal reticular function حقته إنه it can cause it arouses the consciousness due to touch برضو. For example, if you're trying to wake someone up and you touch them and they wake up, the spinal reticular is الtract اللي بيشتغل الحاجة دي. تمام؟ يلا, here's the thing. الtracts دي كلهم you don't need to memorize their functions. يعني أهم اثنين بس الاثنين الفوق اللي هم posterior spinocerebellar anterior spinocerebellar. You need to understand that their function is proprioception في cerebellum. لكن الثلاثة الثانيين it's not as important. I would not stress myself out with them. I would just memorize إن هم they are unconscious sensations. spinal olivary, spinotectal و spinal reticular. تمام؟ focus on knowing the conscious ones and only the cerebellar ones will be unconscious. تمام؟ طيب يلا بعد ذاك ننزل لموضوع testing of tracts. So tracts ديل you know the function of them, right? So you're supposed to be able to assess a person's function for those tracts. يعني لو جابوا لك a patient and they're telling you test if their spinothalamic tract is working, you're supposed to be able to. تمام؟ فيلا each tract بيكون عنده كم test based on the things that you can do. يعني spinothalamic ده you know إنه spinothalamic tract is for touch and temperature, صح؟ So في حاجة اسمها pin prick test, which basically you bring the pin and you prick a person with this pin and you ask them if they can feel it or not. في temperature test برضو you bring حاجة cold or warm and you put it to them and you ask them if they can feel it or not. يلا ده كده يكون pink prick test والtemperature test. تمام. طبعا it's very important that the patient has to have their eyes closed during the pin prick and temperature test عشان and you touch them and then tell them, do you feel that? How does it feel like? And they'll be like, it feels like a kid. And that way you know their tract is working. And you just basically, the testing of the tract is that you're supposed to stimulate the function of the tract and see if the patient can feel it. تمام؟ في تاني dorsal column. الdorsal column برضو it's gonna feel a fine touch اللي هو بتعمله by touching them with a cotton. وفي vibration, which you basically touch them with a vibrating tuning fork. If you don't know what that is, don't bother too much yet. So use a tuning fork for the vibration. And a position sense, you basically change the position of their toe or of their, like any joint, and you ask them if the joint, what direction is the joint pointed at. And you move their knee, you tell them a knee is it flexed or not? You move the toe, is it up or down? And so on. If they're unable to tell, ما عاد عندهم مشكلة في dorsal column. And if the dorsal column is intact, they'll be able to answer you. تمام? Are we good so far? So يلا آخر واحدة آخر test is the test for also for the dorsal column tract. يلا a test that is really wait a minute. Yeah, it's test for the dorsal column. اسمه Romberg sign. يلا Romberg sign ده فكرته شنو؟ The idea is basically that your dorsal column is responsible to some extent for your position sense, right? So it's able to tell if you're standing or if you're not. كده. يلا a dorsal column, if it's damaged, you can still maintain your balance. ليه? Because you can see. يعني a body, for it to be standing, it needs two things. It needs to see and to feel by a dorsal column. تمام? Your body needs to do both. That way, you can stand. If both systems, both your vision and your ability to feel the standing by the dorsal column are damaged, you'll fall. Lakin if one of the two is there, you'll be standing. تمام؟ يعني if you can see but your dorsal column is not working, you'll be standing fine. And if your dorsal column is working but you can't see, you'll be fine. You'll still be able to stand. Lakin if both of them are damaged, you can't stand. تمام? So the idea of Romberg sign is that you ask the patient to stand and close their eyes. Therefore, you eliminate the seeing and you're able to test if they can feel it only with their dorsal tract. تمام? If they can still stand, they're good. If they can't stand the moment they close their eyes, we call it sensory ataxia. تمام? يعني if the patient cannot stand with their eyes closed, اسمها Romberg sign, and we call it sensory ataxia. That's their kind of disease. يعني one of the diseases that happen to people who have a dorsal column injury is that they get sensory ataxia, which means they have a positive Romberg sign, which means that they cannot stand with their eyes closed. Usually في MCQs مرات بيجيبوا لك case of a patient who falls when he turns off the light, for example, or حاجة زي دي. Like they tell you that the moment this patient can no longer see, they can no longer stand. How they could like give it to you directly and be like the patient has a positive Romberg sign. تمام? So this is a sign of the dorsal column injury. تمام? Any questions about this part? Any questions in general في sensory in any area? أو ascending tracts? Okay, so بس خلاص انتوا ما فهمتوا موضوع Romberg sign ده. يعني if the person has sensory ataxia, they can stand fine when they see. لكن the moment they can't see, they can't stand. تمام؟ يلا ده فرقه من شنو؟ من الcerebellar ataxia. يعني if your cerebellum is not working, دي برضه مشكلة بتاعت بالانس، لكن مشكلة البالانس بتكون both when seen and when not seen. تمام. So if there is any questions about the difference between cerebellar ataxia and sensory ataxia, it's that with sensory ataxia you don't have any problems when you can see. في cerebellar ataxia you have problems in both. خلاص يا جماعة، is it all good؟ طيب الزوم هيقطع so let's take a okay ده طيب